All right, my friend, let's talk about something no one wants to admit. Have you ever been at a social gathering, standing in a circle, nodding along to a conversation you don't care about? Maybe someone's talking about their weekend brunch, a new show they're binging, or some drama at work. You smile, maybe throw in a polite, "Oh, really?" or "That's crazy." But deep down, you feel nothing. Just an overwhelming urge to escape. It's not that you hate people. It's not that you think you're better than them. It's just that, well, none of it feels real. If you've ever felt like this, you're not alone. And you're definitely not crazy. Some people thrive in these moments, but for others, especially those who think deeply, socializing often feels more like an obligation than something meaningful. But here's the real question. Do we engage in social life because it truly enriches us or because we fear solitude? It's easy to assume that being social is a universal good. After all, we live in a world where socializing is treated like an unquestionable necessity. Get out there, make friends, network, be more outgoing, they say. But what if you don't want to? What if you're perfectly content spending your time alone, doing things that actually bring you joy? This is where Schopenhauer comes in. He didn't reject social life just for the sake of it. He saw most of it as a waste of time. He believed that much of human interaction is driven by vanity, self-interest, and the need for distraction rather than any real connection. People don't always talk to learn or grow. More often than not, they talk to fill the silence, to gain approval, or to reaffirm their own beliefs. This idea is uncomfortable because it forces us to rethink why we engage in social life at all. Are we truly connecting with others, or are we just keeping ourselves busy? That's what we're about to explore. All right, let's get into it. Arthur Schopenhauer wasn't just some grumpy old guy who hated people. He wasn't against social life for no reason. He simply saw through it. The small talk, the forced smiles, the empty interactions. For him, intelligence wasn't just about logic and reasoning. It was also about recognizing what is truly valuable and what is not. And when he looked at social life, he saw something most people either ignore or refuse to admit. Most of it is meaningless. Now, before you think he was some lonely hermit who despised all human connection, he wasn't. Schopenhauer did believe in deep, meaningful friendships. He recognized the value of sincere relationships built on trust, virtue, and shared understanding. But he also knew that these kinds of connections were rare. He believed most people aren't actually interested in truth, wisdom, or deep conversation. They just want entertainment, distraction, and validation. They don't talk to exchange ideas, they talk to hear themselves speak. So, what happens when a highly intelligent, deeply introspective person enters this world of shallow interactions? They get bored, they get drained. They see through the act, the posturing, the hidden motives. And over time, they start pulling away. Not because they hate people, but because they simply lose interest. Schopenhauer also saw social life as a battlefield of egos. Conversations weren't always about learning or understanding. They were often about competition. Who's the funniest? Who's the most impressive? Who's the most likable? People weren't speaking with each other, they were performing for each other. For Schopenhauer, the choice was simple. Why waste energy on something so exhausting when solitude offers peace, clarity, and true intellectual freedom? This isn't just some old-school, outdated idea. It's more relevant now than ever. Think about today's world, where social media is filled with people trying to prove something, where small talk dominates most conversations, where deep and meaningful discussion is harder to find than ever. So, if you've ever felt like most social interactions are draining, if you've ever preferred reading a book over attending a party, if you've ever wondered why social life feels like more of a chore than a joy, Schopenhauer would say you're not the problem. The world is. And that's exactly why intelligent people often find themselves withdrawing from it. All right, now let's get into the real struggle. Why highly intelligent people often find social life exhausting, frustrating, and at times, completely pointless. Schopenhauer had a lot to say about this, and honestly, once you hear his perspective, it's hard to unsee it. Most conversations lack depth. You ever notice how most conversations are just noise? People talk about the weather, the latest celebrity scandal, or what they had for dinner. Small talk, gossip, pointless debates. None of it adds any real value to life. For Schopenhauer, this was unbearable. He believed that the mind of an intelligent person naturally seeks out ideas, truth, and meaning. But most social interactions don't offer any of that. Instead, they're filled with empty chatter, words spoken not to communicate something meaningful, but just to fill the silence. For an intelligent person, this feels like mental junk food. It doesn't nourish the mind, it doesn't challenge perspectives, it doesn't lead to new insights. So after a while, they start checking out. They stop caring. They'd rather be alone than sit through another mind-numbing discussion about meaningless things. The exhaustion of pretending to care. Here's something no one talks about. Socializing is exhausting when you have to fake it. Most people expect you to laugh at their jokes, show interest in their stories, and act engaged even when you're not. This is what keeps conversations going. It's what makes people likable. But for intelligent individuals, this forced engagement is mentally draining. Schopenhauer saw this as one of the great burdens of social life. The pressure to act interested in things that simply do not matter, just to avoid offending others. Think about how much energy goes into maintaining social appearances. The polite nodding, the forced smiles, the fake enthusiasm. It's exhausting. And over time, many intelligent people just stop playing the game. They'd rather be honest and disengaged than pretend to care about things they don't. And since most people don't appreciate blunt honesty, this often leads to social isolation. But for someone who values their own peace of mind, this isn't a bad trade-off. Social interactions are driven by ego, not truth. Schopenhauer believed that most people don't engage in conversation to seek truth or understanding. They do it to affirm their own beliefs, impress others, or feed their egos. Ever notice how many people talk just to one-up each other? Or how debates rarely end with someone saying, "You know what? You're right. I changed my mind." That's because most social interactions are performances, not discussions. People aren't searching for truth. They're searching for validation. They want to be liked, admired, and seen as interesting. They care more about how they appear than what is actually being said. For an intelligent person, this is unbearable. They can't help but notice how fake everything feels. They see through the manipulation, the hidden agendas, the need to impress. And once you see it, it's impossible to unsee. Schopenhauer believed that this is why intelligent people withdraw. Not because they hate people, but because they recognize that most conversations aren't about genuine connection. They're about competition, status, and vanity. And once you realize that, the appeal of social life fades quickly. The battle of wills. Why social life feels like a struggle. Here's another brutal truth Schopenhauer pointed out. Most human relationships are not based on harmony, but on a struggle for dominance. Think about it. How many friendships, workplaces, and family gatherings involve subtle power struggles? Who gets to talk the most? Who has the most interesting story? Who can make the best joke? Who is the center of attention? Even when people seem friendly, there's often an unspoken battle of egos happening beneath the surface. People don't just interact, they compete. Schopenhauer believed that a truly intelligent person doesn't want to waste their time on these hidden power games. They don't need validation from others. They don't care about impressing people. And because of that, they find social life exhausting, frustrating, and ultimately unfulfilling. So, what's the solution? For Schopenhauer, the answer was clear. Stop wasting time on meaningless social interactions. Prioritize depth over quantity. Only engage in conversations that actually stimulate your mind. Stop pretending to care. If something doesn't interest you, don't force yourself to engage. Choose solitude over mediocrity. It's better to be alone with your thoughts than surrounded by empty conversations. This wasn't about being antisocial, it was about being intentional with your time and energy. And for intelligent individuals, solitude often provides more fulfillment than 1,000 meaningless conversations ever could. Now let's get into why solitude is actually a good thing, not something to be feared. All right, my friend, now let's flip the script. We've talked about why intelligent people often feel drained by social life, shallow conversations, ego-driven interactions, and the exhausting act of pretending to care. But here's the big question. If most socializing is a waste of time, what's the alternative? Schopenhauer had a simple answer. Solitude. Now, in today's world, solitude gets a bad reputation. People associate it with loneliness, isolation, or even social failure. But Schopenhauer saw it differently. To him, solitude wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. It was the key to mental clarity, deep thinking, and true independence. Let's break it down. Solitude fuels deep thinking. Ever notice that your best ideas don't come when you're surrounded by noise? They come when you're alone. In the shower, on a walk, lying in bed at night. That's because solitude allows your mind to work without interruption. Schopenhauer understood that great ideas don't come from constant interaction. They come from uninterrupted thought. When you're alone, you have the mental space to explore ideas deeply, question assumptions, and truly engage with your own thoughts. History backs this up. Some of the greatest minds, Nietzsche, Thoreau, Einstein, even Tesla, spent large amounts of time in solitude. Not because they hated people, but because they needed mental space to think. Now, compare that to a life filled with constant socializing. Small talk, social media, group chats, notifications. It's all noise. It clutters the mind. It leaves no room for deep thought. Schopenhauer's point? If you want to develop real intellectual depth, you need solitude. Solitude provides emotional peace. Social life isn't just mentally draining, it's emotionally exhausting. Think about how much energy goes into managing relationships, the expectations, the misunderstandings, the disappointments, the constant need to keep up appearances. Schopenhauer believed that most human relationships are a source of stress rather than joy. People lie, betray, compete, and manipulate, often without even realizing it. And the more intelligent you are, the more you notice these dynamics, which makes them even harder to tolerate. Solitude, on the other hand, removes all of that noise. No drama, no egos, no hidden motives, just peace. This is why so many intelligent people prefer being alone. It's not because they dislike others, it's because they value their own peace of mind more than the fleeting entertainment of social life. Solitude leads to true independence. Most people rely on social interaction for validation. They want to be liked, they want approval. They fear being alone because it forces them to confront who they are without external input. Schopenhauer saw this as a trap. If your happiness depends on others, on their opinions, their attention, their approval, you're never truly free. You're always adjusting yourself to fit in, to be accepted, to be liked. But solitude removes that dependency. It forces you to become self-sufficient, to find joy, meaning, and fulfillment within yourself instead of from others. And that kind of independence? It's rare. Most people avoid solitude because it forces them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. But those who embrace it, really embrace it, develop a kind of inner strength that social people never do. Solitude helps you find meaningful connections. Ironically, choosing solitude doesn't mean rejecting relationships. It just means being more selective. Schopenhauer wasn't against friendships. He just believed that real friendships, ones built on depth, honesty, and mutual respect, are rare. And the only way to find them is to stop wasting time on shallow connections. By choosing solitude, you naturally filter out the noise. You stop tolerating empty relationships. You focus only on people who genuinely add value to your life. Quality over quantity. And when you do that, the connections you do make will be far more meaningful. So, is solitude the answer? According to Schopenhauer, yes, but not in an extreme way. He wasn't saying never talk to anyone again. He was saying be intentional. Use solitude to think deeply, gain clarity, and develop real independence. Stop chasing shallow social interactions out of fear of being alone. Prioritize peace over meaningless engagement. Choose quality over quantity in your relationships. The world makes solitude seem like a weakness, but in reality, it's one of the greatest strengths a person can have. Now let's get into how this all applies to the modern world, where solitude is harder to find than ever. All right, my friend. Now let's talk about the world we actually live in today. One that makes solitude almost impossible. Schopenhauer lived in the 19th century, long before social media, smartphones, and constant notifications. And yet, his ideas about social life being distracting, shallow, and exhausting still apply perfectly to modern society. In fact, they might be even more relevant today than they were back then. Because, let's be real, our world is designed to keep us constantly connected. We live in an era where silence feels awkward, being alone is seen as a problem, and social validation has become an obsession. If you're not constantly checking your phone, responding to messages, or engaging in conversations, people assume something is wrong with you. But Schopenhauer would argue that this constant connection isn't making us any happier. If anything, it's making us more distracted, more anxious, and more dependent on external validation. So let's break down why his philosophy is more important than ever, and why choosing solitude in a hyper-connected world might be the smartest decision you'll ever make. Schopenhauer believed that most people don't seek conversation for the sake of genuine connection. They do it to impress, validate themselves, or pass the time. Now, take that idea and apply it to social media. What do you see? People posting not to share, but to get likes and approval. Arguments happening not to find truth, but to win and feel superior. Carefully curated photos, captions, and updates designed to create an image rather than reflect reality. Schopenhauer would have called this one giant illusion, a never-ending performance where people aren't truly interacting. They're just feeding their own egos. And the worst part? Most people don't even realize they're caught in this game. For someone who values truth, depth, and authenticity, this world of artificial connection is unbearable. And the only way to escape it? Disconnect. Choose solitude. Free yourself from the need for constant validation. Think about how much noise surrounds us every single day. Texts, emails, group chats, news alerts, social media feeds, phone calls, notifications from apps you don't even remember downloading. We're expected to always be available, always responding, always engaging. Schopenhauer would have seen this as mental chaos. He believed that solitude was essential for deep thinking, but how can anyone think deeply when their mind is constantly being interrupted? This is why so many people today struggle with focus, creativity, and even basic decision-making. Their minds are too cluttered. They never have a moment of real solitude to process their own thoughts because they're too busy keeping up with everyone else's. The solution? Turn it off. Step back. Protect your mental space. Because without solitude, your thoughts are never truly your own. One of the biggest reasons people avoid solitude today is FOMO, the fear of missing out. Social media constantly reminds us that everyone else is doing something. They're at a party, at a concert, on vacation, out with friends. And if you're sitting at home alone, it can feel like you're losing some invisible competition. But here's the truth. Most of these experiences are nowhere near as amazing as they look online. People exaggerate. They stage their moments. They curate their lives for display. Meanwhile, the person posting a perfect group selfie might actually be bored out of their mind, wishing they were at home in bed. Schopenhauer would tell you, stop chasing what others are doing. Focus on what actually fulfills you. If that means being alone with a book, taking a walk, or just thinking in peace, then that's the right choice for you. Now, let's talk about the actual quality of social interactions today. We've never been more connected, yet loneliness is at an all-time high. Why? Because most of these connections are surface level. Endless group chats where no one says anything meaningful. Networking events where people are just trying to get ahead. Friendships that are based on convenience, not real connection. Schopenhauer warned that real friendships are rare. He believed that most people engage in social life out of habit, not out of genuine interest in each other. And when you look at how many friendships today are built on status, social climbing, or shared distractions rather than deep understanding, it's hard to disagree with him. So, what's the alternative? Be selective. Choose depth over quantity. If someone truly adds value to your life, great. But if you're forcing yourself into social situations just to avoid being alone, stop. Solitude is far better than empty relationships. Here's a brutal truth most people don't want to hear. If you can't be happy alone, you'll never be truly happy with others. Most people rely on external validation to feel good about themselves. They need approval, attention, and constant social interaction to avoid facing themselves. But Schopenhauer saw solitude as a test of true self-sufficiency. If you can enjoy your own company, if you can be alone and still feel content, then you've achieved something most people never will. It means you're not dependent on others for your happiness. It means your self-worth isn't tied to social approval. It means you have control over your mind, your emotions, and your time. And in a world that constantly pressures you to seek validation from others, that kind of independence is a superpower. So, what's the takeaway? Schopenhauer's philosophy is more relevant today than ever before. The modern world is drowning in distractions, superficiality, and artificial connection. If you want to think deeply, live authentically, and protect your peace of mind, then you have to choose solitude over mindless socializing. That doesn't mean you have to cut off all human contact. It just means be intentional about who you give your time to. Don't fear being alone. Embrace it. Recognize that social validation is a trap. Create space for deep thought and real self-awareness. Solitude isn't loneliness, it's freedom. And in a world that demands your constant attention, choosing to be alone, even just for a while, might be the most powerful decision you can make. Now let's address the common pushback. But isn't social life important? Let's break that down next. All right, my friend. We've spent a lot of time talking about why social life is draining, why solitude is underrated, and why Schopenhauer believed that most people are just filling time rather than truly connecting. But let's be fair. Not all social interactions are bad. Not every friendship is shallow. Not every conversation is pointless. And not everyone is just looking for validation or distraction. So, let's tackle the pushback. Is Schopenhauer's view too extreme? Is solitude really the answer? Or is there a way to balance deep thinking and meaningful social connections? Humans are social creatures. We need connection. This is the biggest argument against solitude. People say we're wired for social life. We're built to be part of a community. And they're not wrong. From an evolutionary perspective, humans survived by forming tribes, working together and building relationships. Social bonds gave us protection, resources, and support. Even today, having strong social connections is linked to happiness, lower stress, and even a longer life. So, does this mean Schopenhauer was wrong? Not exactly. His argument wasn't that all social interaction is worthless. It was that most of it is. He wasn't against friendship. He was against superficiality. The key is intention. If your social life is full of people who genuinely care about you, challenge you, and make your life richer, then that's great. Keep them close. But if your social life feels like an endless loop of empty conversations and forced interactions, then what are you really gaining from it? This is why solitude is important. It filters out the noise. It helps you see which relationships actually matter and which ones you've just been keeping around out of habit. Isn't it possible to have both? Meaningful friendships and solitude? Absolutely, and honestly, that's the best path. Schopenhauer wasn't saying, lock yourself in a cave and never talk to anyone. What he was saying is, be highly selective. Think of it this way. A deep conversation with one real friend is worth more than 50 small talk sessions. A night alone doing something you love is better than an exhausting social event you don't care about. A few close, trusted people are better than a huge network of acquaintances. The goal isn't to avoid people completely, it's to avoid wasting time on meaningless interactions. You can and should have real friendships. Just make sure they're genuine and not just another way to avoid being alone. What if I enjoy socializing? Am I just not intelligent enough? Let's clear this up right now. Enjoying social life doesn't mean you're unintelligent. Schopenhauer wasn't saying that all smart people hate socializing. What he was saying is that deep thinkers struggle with social life when it lacks meaning. If you love being around people, laughing, sharing stories, and feeling connected, that's great. You don't have to be isolated to be smart. The difference is in why you socialize. Are you spending time with people because it genuinely fulfills you? Or are you socializing just to avoid silence, boredom, or the discomfort of being alone? If social life adds value to your life, then keep enjoying it. But if you ever feel drained by shallow conversations or social pressure, Schopenhauer would tell you to step back and ask, is this worth my time? What about family and work? I can't just be alone all the time. Fair point. In reality, most of us have to interact with others, whether it's family, coworkers, or even strangers. Cutting off social life completely isn't realistic. But here's the key. You don't have to be available all the time. At work, be professional, but don't waste energy on office gossip. With family, spend time with them, but set boundaries for your mental space. With friends, prioritize the ones who actually bring something meaningful to your life. You don't need to isolate yourself. You just need to be mindful of where your time and energy are going. But isn't solitude depressing? Not if you're using it the right way. Most people fear being alone because they equate it with loneliness. But they're not the same thing. Loneliness is feeling disconnected from others, even when you're surrounded by people. Solitude is being alone by choice and actually enjoying it. The key difference? Purpose. If you're just sitting in solitude with no direction, you might feel lonely. But if you use that time to read, think, create, reflect, or do something that fulfills you, then solitude becomes a source of power. Schopenhauer saw solitude as a tool, not a punishment. The goal isn't to avoid people forever. The goal is to create space for your own mind to grow, free from distractions and meaningless social obligations. Finding the right balance. So, where do we land? Is Schopenhauer right? Should we all retreat into solitude and avoid social life entirely? Not necessarily, but his message is still valuable. Don't fear solitude. Use it. It's where deep thought, creativity, and clarity come from. Be selective with social life. Not every relationship is worth your time. Choose quality over quantity. Question why you socialize. Are you doing it for real connection or just to avoid being alone? Don't chase validation. The need for approval keeps people trapped in meaningless interactions. Set boundaries. You don't have to be available to everyone all the time. Protect your mental energy. At the end of the day, you get to decide how much social life is right for you. If you thrive in deep, meaningful connections, then focus on those. If you find more peace in solitude, embrace it without guilt. Schopenhauer's real lesson isn't about cutting people off. It's about being intentional with your time, your mind, and your energy. So ask yourself, are you engaging in social life because it truly brings you something valuable, or simply because it's what everyone expects you to do? If you can answer that question honestly, then you've already won. Now let's wrap this up with a final conclusion that ties everything together. Is social life a necessity or just a habit? All right, my friend, we've covered a lot. We've broken down why intelligent people often struggle with social life, why Schopenhauer saw most human interactions as distractions, and why solitude is not something to fear, but something to embrace. Now let's land this plane with one final uncomfortable question. Do you actually enjoy social life? Or have you just been conditioned to seek it? Think about it. How much of your socializing is genuinely fulfilling? And how much of it is just something you do because you think you're supposed to? Are you spending time with people because they challenge, support, and enrich your life? Or are you just avoiding the discomfort of being alone? Do your social interactions leave you energized, or do they drain you? This is the kind of self-awareness Schopenhauer was talking about. He wasn't saying, shut yourself off from the world. He was saying, stop wasting time on things that don't truly add value to your life. And that's the real takeaway here. Solitude is a choice, not a curse. Society pressures us to be constantly social, to always be connected, to seek validation. But the truth is, solitude is where the most profound growth happens. It's where you develop independence. It's where your deepest thoughts form. It's where you discover who you actually are, without the noise of other people's opinions. Choosing solitude over meaningless socializing isn't being antisocial. It's self-respect. It means you value your time, your energy, and your peace of mind. Quality over quantity, always. If Schopenhauer were here today, he'd tell you this. Surround yourself only with people who make your life richer, ignore the rest. If a relationship feels forced, let it go. If a conversation feels empty, don't waste your energy. If social life feels like a chore, stop forcing yourself into it. You don't have to be a hermit. Just be intentional. Prioritize quality over quantity in your relationships. Choose depth over noise. The world fears solitude, but you don't have to. Most people stay socially active not because they love it, but because they fear being alone. They fear silence. They fear missing out. They fear losing validation. But what if you let go of that fear? What if you embraced solitude as a strength rather than a weakness? Schopenhauer would argue that if you can sit alone without distractions, without the need for external approval, and still feel completely at peace, then you've unlocked something most people never will. True intellectual independence. So now it's up to you. What kind of life do you actually want? Will you keep chasing endless, shallow social interactions? Or will you step back, embrace solitude, and only engage with the relationships that truly matter? There's no right or wrong answer here, just awareness. But one thing is certain, Schopenhauer's philosophy is more relevant today than ever. And if you ever find yourself feeling drained by social life, wondering why it all feels so empty, just remember that you're not alone. You're just seeing the world clearly. And that, my friend, is a rare and powerful thing. Choose wisely.